what's pottery? It's an art form that gets used in the home, and it gets used in everyday, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or snacks, or, a midnight snack, or a morning cup of coffee, or a container to hold your goodies. All these different moments in life that are essential to everybody, and they relate to everybody. And it's just a part of it, it's just a part of everyday life. And to have an art form be involved in that, I want my message on my pots to highlight those moments and bring like warmth and positivity into those moments. And combining my upbringing of like cedar and incorporating that into my work, I see that as a way of passing on that positivity to other people.
This is Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast from Loose Leaf Transmissions. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. And if you are new here to the podcast, my name is Tyler, and I'm a composer, a broadcaster, producer. I tend to get myself into doing a lot of different things. But most of all, I love making stuff. And I also love sitting down with creative people to talk about the work that they make, the process, philosophy, and all the human stuff in between. Today, I'm joined by Sinclaire Marie, a potter, educator, and the atmospheric artist in residence at Queen City Clay here in Cincinnati. Sinclaire's practice is rooted in atmospheric firing, which we break down and discuss significantly in this conversation, and also in everyday forms meant to be used. She's a member of the Navajo Nation, and we talk about how she carries intention and identity into her pots, right down to rolling the texture of cedar into the clay. We get into the information that a pot holds, throwing lines, flashing ash and glaze traces, the idea of marks as memory, the discipline of showing up to the studio, and what it means to listen to fire while you work. We also talk about community, trading with other artists, and returning Earth, literally, back to the table. I've been really excited to sit down with Sinclaire for quite some time, and the conversation begins in just a moment. This show grows because of people like you, not some algorithm. So if something in today's conversation sparks something for you, the best way to support it is to follow the podcast and to share it with someone who'd get it too. You'll find links to subscribe, follow us on Instagram, or support on Patreon, all in the show notes or at looseleaftransmissions.com. Now, on to my conversation with Sinclaire Marie. Well, Sinclaire, you are one of my upcoming guests that I've been probably the most excited about because I've kind of in that pottery ceramics orbit in my life, but I've never had a potter on the show. So I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff we're going to get to talk about. We have all kinds of interesting connections based on where we have both lived, which I'm excited to connect about. And so I just want to thank you so much for your time today and for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Tyler. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, awesome. So where we like to begin on Music Maker is, regardless of if you're a composer or a visual artist or a writer or what have you, is what is your earliest artistic memory? And I suppose for you, there might be two moments, maybe like visual art, and then like the first time maybe you got your hands on some clay and worked with it.
Yeah. So I was always that weird art kid throughout school that tried to get to the art class whenever I could. I was always doodling on the side of my pages or, painting or drawing when I was at home. So I've always had that background of visual art throughout my life. But the first time that I had experienced anything with clay, we had one project in high school. I thought it was really interesting. And so fast forward to undergrad, I actually got a scholarship, and I had to, as a requirement, I had to be a part of a club. and I saw the ceramic guild, and I was like, the ceramic guild, that sounds
Mm.
really cool. I want to be a part of a guild. I had no idea like what ceramics really even was, like what the art field looked like. And so I show up for the first meeting, and there's all these like super cool people and all these like big equipment and like these big old things that I later found out were kilns, and just like it was so bizarre, and I didn't understand any of it. And it was super, super interesting. I didn't have any interaction with clay for a couple of meetings until Adam Youngblood, the professor at the time, he said, "Hey, we're gonna go to a trip to this thing called Nsika, and do you want to go?" And I was like, "Oh, like yeah, I'm down to go on a trip. Let's go." I had no idea what it was, and I show up, and just my mind was blown. There was just the things that people can do with clay is just amazing. And then from there, I just can't stay away.
So I want to unpack two things there because it's really fascinating to me as I'm going to call myself an outsider. I did do pottery, as we will probably get into, for a couple years recently, maybe 3 years. So I kind of know what I'm talking about, I think. But at any rate, I'm fascinated by, first, you started doing pottery in high school, and you know my wife Susanna. That's how we met. Susanna kind of has a similar story where she always says like, "Oh, I did a little ceramics in high school," and then she reconnected with it like after the age of 30. And I mean, I don't remember an option. Like, I don't remember in high school having an opportunity to try something like that. I was pretty deep into music, so maybe that's why I wasn't paying attention maybe, but is it common for high schools to offer, is it like a ceramics program, a ceramics class, or is it just like something that you do part of a semester taking an art class?
That is such a good point. I'm so glad that you brought that up. It is super common for people to have only experienced it once. I think it's because of the equipment requirements. You know, you need a kiln, and kilns are very expensive, and the American education system does not tend to favor the artistic fields. And so our funding has to go to things that, such as like pencils and colored pencils and paper and all that kind of stuff. And funding for kilns is hard to come by. And even with that, it is a very technical field, and there's not a lot of education behind that. And so, yeah, it's super common for people to have only experienced it in high school. And I think also it has to do with people not seeing pottery as a quote unquote like art form. When people think of art, they typically think of painting or drawing or, music or something like that. They don't necessarily see ceramic craft as, in that umbrella. It is. And I think that that's a narrative that we all need to change as we go forward.
Yeah, gotcha. And so it sound I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it kinda sounds like was it dabbling in high school, or was it like you were pretty into it in high school before you went to college? Or
It was literally one project. I made like a little
yeah,
coffin.
right, right, okay. Okay, so, you say that when you got to undergrad, you noticed, the ceramics guild. Does that mean that you came into college not intending to study art at all, or were you planning to study art?
Oh, I was. So my focus was charcoal drawing
I
and
see,
oil
okay.
painting. Yeah, so charcoal drawing for sure. And just throughout undergrad, I found myself spending more time in the clay studio than drawing. And so it just made sense to make the switch.
Cool, and so this is at Morehead State University,
Yep. Yep.
which is also, you're the second person on the podcast I've talked to. The other one is a musician. Of course, I went to Morehead State. We're going to talk about this a lot more, but now that you mention it, yeah, I guess all of my friends who were art majors who happened to do pottery, they kind of started out not doing pottery, and then like suddenly that was their identity. So it sounds like that was your case as well.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And that's the narrative that I hear a lot as well. As soon as people actually get time to sit down with it, study with it, and spend time with it, then they realize like what a beautiful medium this is, and it's addicting, and people get obsessed.
Was that your first encounter with a potter at Morehead?
Yeah, yeah. Adam Youngblood was my first encounter with a potter. He's passed, unfortunately, but His work was so bizarre to me. I didn't understand it at all. Like, it's so fluid and loose, and the colors in it, and it was just something so outside of my understanding of what art was. And like, I just had to investigate it more and more and more. And like, I've come to like really, really, really appreciate his pots and his teachings with that.
I'm curious to hear more about like that sense of discovery that you had when when you were interacting with his pieces and his work, but also saying that you had your mind blown at NCECA, which for those who don't know, that's the big national ceramics conference. I guess.
Yeah, yeah, I don't have it memorized. It's National Ceramic Education for something like that, something like
Yeah, I've
that.
never heard it not just called NCECA,
Yeah.
and it was here in Cincinnati, what, 2 years ago, last year.
Yeah,
I don't remember,
something
but
like that.
I mean, what was that like? I mean, it sounds like you came from like a maybe an illustration background, and so to suddenly be in college and like surrounded by all of these possibilities, what was
Mm.
that like?
There's a lot of thought that went into that. So with charcoal drawing, in my opinion, all art form in general is it's a visual language, right? And so I was throughout high school communicating through my art with very straightforward illustrations of charcoal drawings, whereas ceramics, they communicate in such a different way. Like, there's this concept of interacting with the artwork and this, functionality and how that adds into the concept and the whole process. And it just so interesting. And thinking back to Adam's pots, he does a lot of wood fired pots. And there was wood ash and there was crystals and there's flashing and there was just all of this elemental history on these pots that I've never seen before in like any artwork. And it just was so intriguing how elemental it was. And it just had this sense of like ancestry and history and tradition that I was missing in my charcoal adventures.
Yeah, I don't know. As a musician, like I miss I well, I've always noticed like the lack of tactile. I mean, if you're playing like a I don't know, like a violin, there is a tactile thing to that. Or I grew up playing brass instruments, which feels less tactile, like I'm just wiggling my fingers basically. And now with composition, I'm pretty set on like writing things out by hand. But when I encountered pottery, it was like that tactile feeling to me was like very important. It was like, whoa, I can like make a thing and people can hold it like
Oh
like
yeah, oh yeah.
I made a CD and people can hold that, but it's not the same. Like people can't, people just like put that in a CD player, and which don't exist anymore apparently. But at any rate, that was like really exciting for me. It sounds like that's also like a common experience with people who discover, like even professionals like yourself, like that first moment where you realize, oh, this is a thing, like an object,
Yeah.
in a way that like pen to paper isn't,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. I mean, that's also an object, but you know what I mean.
But I think it adds into like what senses are you communicating to? Like, are you listening? Are you smelling? And this sense of touch that comes with pots, it's just so different. When you go to a museum, there's all these barriers, like don't touch the artwork, don't touch the, nothing. But with pots, they're created for you to use, they're
Yeah.
created for you to interact with it in the home and all that. And it's really interesting.
Yeah. I will say in a museum setting, maybe this is just because I know more about it, but I do like looking at pottery in museums because a lot of times you can walk around it. Whereas, like, I'm not just staring at a wall.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I guess I'll spend 30 seconds looking at this picture, move on. So that's awesome. I mean, so Moorhead, you're getting deeper and deeper into pottery. I mean, can you share a bit of an overview and connect the dots, so to speak, of your creative journey from there? I mean, what was the journey like through those years of undergrad, and where are you at now? And do you feel like you followed a more conventional path, or were there any unexpected twists?
Oh.
And I have no idea what conventional path in other art forms is. I don't know what that is.
I was just about to say conventional path. I don't know what that is. If you do, tell me.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause, it truly is just like different case by case. So I found it in undergrad. And I was still focusing in charcoal, and come time for my BFA show, I had all these charcoal drawings, but it just didn't feel right. And so I made the transition to focus in ceramics. And so from there, I was firing in raku firing, and that was my gateway drug into atmospheric firing, like playing with fire and those gas lines. And it was just such a different process. It was so fun. Thankfully, Adam introduced me into that. And so from there, I did a couple of wood firings. I was like, ooh, this is really fun. This is cool. Graduated, and I lost access to those atmospheric kilns from the university. And so from there, I went back into electric, fired work, and I started working at the Gateway Regional Art Center in Mount Sterling, Kentucky. And while I was working there, I started out as a community outreach coordinator, and I kind of made my way up to director of education and lead curator, and working at a 501c3 nonprofit with only 3 full-time staff members was very time consuming. And
Yep.
so my ceramic practice kind of dropped while I focused in those art administration assignments. And that was really interesting still, because I was learning how to teach art. I was still working in clay. My dining room was my studio. I didn't have a dining room. I just kind of made there. And so I still kind of made on the side while I learned how to teach and how to share the artwork. One of the projects at the art center that was really, really fun was the art of recovery. So I'd go into the jail and teach projects, and one of them was clay. And during that time, I learned the significance in sharing my love and my passion with other people, so that way they could also get that as well. And so during my time at the art center, I was there for about 2 years, and I was starting to notice how lacking my making was. I would make a couple of cups here and there, but I wasn't investigating form. I wasn't investigating these firing methods. And so, trying to get back into that, I went over to Bobtown Arts in Berea, Kentucky, and fired at their wood fire kiln a couple of times. And I took on a 1 credit back at Morehead State with Quinn Mayer to, study the wood firing a little bit more. And at that point, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I was looking for other opportunities, and I put in an application and got accepted to a residency at Queen City Clay, which is where we met. And so now I'm the atmospheric artist in resident there, and I study wood fire and soda firing, kiln building, and all that stuff. So a little bit of hopping around. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess when I say conventional, because I have realized, the more I ask this question, even to other, people who do what I do, it's kind of like, well, what does that mean? I think that could vary from like country to country as well. I've talked to people from Europe and in Mexico and Canada, and yeah, it's like, what does that actually mean, conventional? But I guess like, do you see other artists in your field doing that kind of work that you just described? Are you taking that kind of path, or is there a more linear kind of path that you chose not to do for whatever reason?
So I found that a lot of people in our field will go into residencies. Residencies are a pretty good standard way of getting to the practice and getting that education outside of the university field. Again, like going to university, getting a BFA, MFA residencies. There's apprenticeships that people will do. I have not done one of those. That system might be a little complicated, but yeah, those are the pretty standard ways of staying in this field.
I realized too, when you were describing, your workspace being your dining room, like that was your studio, that we haven't really quite established. Maybe I've always assumed this too, so it's kind of my fault, but you primarily work with wheel thrown pottery, or were you also doing like hand built pottery, like in your, what, I mean, did you have a wheel in your dining room? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
I did.
Cool.
Yeah, wheel thrown pots in the dining room,
Awesome.
with the cats running around. And
Yeah, I just imagine like you have people over for like a dinner or something, and you just make a plate and Obviously, you can't do that, but
That
it's
reminds
fun to
me.
think about.
My landlord had to come over and fix something, and he brought a buddy, and he saw my N95 mask, and he's like, "I think your tenant is cooking meth." And they're just like, "No, no, she's a potter.
Yeah,
She's just worried about the clay dust."
yeah, that's. Oh man. So when did you know that you wanted to pursue this craft as a career? Was there a specific moment when that happened, or was it more just like you fell in love with this and you haven't really thought about anything else ever?
The latter for sure. A gradual progression into just like this. I need to do this. This is what I want to do. If I'm not working in clay or progressing or learning about it, then I feel like not. I'm kind of lost without it.
Yeah, I hear you. So we've touched a little bit on where you have been and where you are at now. You're currently based in Cincinnati, which is where I'm based, but we actually share a lot more in common than that. The first of which is not one. You are a member of the Navajo Nation and originally from Arizona, but then you moved to Kentucky at a young age, and you studied at Morehead State University in Kentucky, which is where I studied. And you worked at the Gateway Regional Arts Center, like you said, in Mount Sterling, Kentucky, which is where I grew up. And
Yeah.
I think you are the first person I've ever met in my adult life that has like moved there. Like someone I've met like in
Are
the
you saying
past
like
two.
choosing to move to Mount Sterling?
Well, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love it there. Like my family has lived there like many generations back, but I just think it's like I think that's very interesting. And it's something I can appreciate. So, I mean, I'm sure that you could answer this question deeply for all of these places, Arizona, Kentucky, Cincinnati, but how did all of these stops along the way shape you, and do you see them lingering in your work today? And I am especially curious about Mount Sterling.
I mean, absolutely. I lean on my experience throughout my life just as inspiration for my work. And I feel that living in all these different locations has given me a better perspective on what different cultures look like and different appreciations when it comes to geological location. When it comes to the city up in, Arizona, the clay is just so beautiful up there, and the smell of the rain when it hits that clay. And then, southern Arizona in the Sonoran Desert, I mean, the landscape is beautiful, the green that comes from the cactus, and again, the smell that hits the dirt. And moving to Kentucky, everything's green, and the clay there is still
Mm.
beautiful too. And so I like to think about the landscape of all the different locations and how that adds into the pots, the texture of the land, the rocks, and the colors that are in the dirt. And the colors really stand out between all of them.
Do you feel like that's something that you very intentionally kind of build into your work, or do you feel like it's more like a subconscious element where these impressions show up without you really even thinking about it?
Subconscious for sure. I wish I was more conscious of it, but I just kind of lean into what I'm drawn to. Like what I try to notice what my eye goes to first. Is it the flashing of the color? Okay, like what does it remind me of? The texture of this. What does it remind me of? And just leaning into what catches my attention first.
Last about this time last year was my first time in Arizona. And unfortunately, it did not rain because it was like 115 degrees every day.
Yeah.
But we spent a few days there. And then I think it was the summer, 2 summers ago, we drove out to, almost drove to the Utah border in Colorado. Because I have a friend who lives in Grand Junction, which is the high desert of Colorado. And both times, both of those instances, being someone who's only ever lived in Kentucky, Ohio, and then Florida, and being in a place like Colorado, Western Colorado and Arizona was just like mind blowing to me. Not just because it was like very, very hot in like this
Yeah.
inconceivable sort of way. I know Tucson maybe isn't as bad as Phoenix, which is where I was, but also just like it was just like colors I'd never seen before in nature. And so I totally feel what you're talking about. And I don't think I would enjoy living there, but I was just like, I have to come back here. in the wintertime.
Yeah,
Because it's just like, oh, I'd love to go hiking. You're right, the cacti, like the colors against that kind of earthen, it's like an earth that I've never seen before. I love it.
exactly. And just being in a different environment, I like to think about our environment and what we take in, and the environment in Arizona, it's very harsh and rustic and dusty and rugged. And compared to Kentucky, I would say it's a little bit softer. There's grass. You don't have to worry about stepping on cacti, or
Yeah.
it's much more like fresh, and like there's a lot more moisture everywhere, the humidity and all that. And how that adds into how we interact with it.
Well, you're describing these places in very, again, like tactile ways. I mean, do you feel like there's specific ways that you work with texture, perhaps, that can reflect this? Or, I mean, can you give me examples of these ideas in your work? How they intermingle, or yeah, maybe just that, how they intermingle.
Actually, one of the core focuses of my work is cedar. So cedar comes, it's this plant that is pretty prominent throughout West. There's different species, of course, but in my upbringing, we were raised to use cedar for like smudging, and to use it to clean the house, and to get all that negative out, and to kind of ground yourself and to rebalance yourself. And using that texture of the cedar, I've actually made what's called a roulette, and that puts in the texture, that saves the texture of the cedar into this tool that I can then roll onto the side of my pots, reflecting that texture onto the pot. And so that's my way of bringing that tactile environment into my work to share with people. So that way they get to experience that as well. Such a different plant as well. Like this leaves are a little bit more scaly than like what a traditional like leaf would look like in Kentucky. And to have that sense of like, what is this? Like, what is this texture? What is this pattern? Is really appealing to me, and I'd like to reflect that in my work.
And then, I mean, thinking about texture on your pots, I mean, then you get into like how glaze interacts with it, right? I mean, what have the results of that been like that keep you kind of coming back to those textures? I mean, do you feel like it's, maybe you don't have an answer to this, but do you feel like a cedar texture maybe, that might yield a different result with the glaze interaction than, I don't know, like a maple texture, if whatever that looks like. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah, with the cedar, I've been playing around with, like the different patterns and textures, but yeah, I mean, it's different every kiln load. Every kiln load gives different results, and it's kind of hard to kind of say this is what it's going to look like. And that's what I find appealing in atmospheric firing, is that it's always going to be different. With this close knitted texture of the cedar, there's so many crevices for glaze to pull into, for flashing marks to kind of run over, to give another layer of information and history onto how this pot was made, which is really appealing to me.
Yeah. So when did you first utilize these sorts of imprints? I mean, when did they first start appearing in your work? Is this a recent development, or was it just like a thing that you immediately went to when you started?
I'd say it's pretty recent, within the past year and a half, 2 years. I've always had thoughts of incorporating it into my work, but I haven't. Again, going back to having the time to make, I didn't really have the time or the like mental capacity to like sit down and actually make this thing and like test it in my work. And so with this residency starting, that's when I really started to lean into incorporating that cedar concept into my work and seeing how I could do that. Do I want to do that through texture? Do I want to do that with more straightforward illustration on the pot? So within the past year and a half for that.
And you had mentioned to me before we met up that this is very much connected to the Diné practice of burning cedar. You talked about, burning cedar to cleanse things when you were growing up. And I guess I'm wondering about the intention here. I mean, is this a very intentional thing where you're connecting to your identity, or is it not quite like that?
I love that word, intention. It's one of my favorite words. But yeah, it is a very intentional decision on my part because I'm thinking about the why. Why clay? Why pots? What do I want to communicate through my pots? And what do I want to be carried through on the pot? And I just start thinking about what's pottery. It's an art form that gets used in the home and it gets used in everyday, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or snacks, or a midnight snack, or a morning cup of coffee, or a container to hold your goodies. All these different moments in life that are essential to everybody and they relate to everybody, and it's just a part of it. It's just a part of everyday life. And to have an art form being involved in that, I want my message on my pots to highlight those moments and bring like warmth and positivity into those moments. And combining my upbringing of like cedar and incorporating that into my work, I see that as a way of passing on that positivity to other people. Because growing up, whenever we'd move into a new house, we'd smudge it just to,
Yeah.
make sure that it's ours, and the energy of what was there past is gone, or if we were going through something, or it was cedar was always that thing that reminded me, oh yeah, everything's gonna be okay. Everything's okay. Everything's fine. Everything is good. And so I want my pots to kind of reflect that message in a way. And so that's why I incorporate cedar into my pots. I want people to have it in their hands and have it close to them and have that sense of like things are good in their hands, and to make something that you can nourish yourself with, have this plate created with this intention, and then make some like bomb ass like steak and eggs or something and put it on there and like having
Yeah.
this great old meal with it. That just sounds like such a fun interaction.
Hearing you describe like the texture of cedar, that was really easy for me to like make a, connect the dots with. But then it hadn't occurred to me that there's like a symbolism to it as well, which I really love. Do you feel like your identity and your upbringing show up in any other way in your work besides just cedar?
Yeah, I try to find myself through my pots. And so identity is there for sure. I'm getting a little bit more like illustrative with my pots in addition to the texture and the atmospheric surfaces. And that way I can be a little bit more direct in how my identity is on the pots. I definitely lean more into like motifs rather than direct, like, bam. you
Yeah.
know, that
Yeah.
is me. That is my self portrait. Or, um, but yeah, I'd say the color scheme as well. I love reds and oranges. They're great colors. And I would say the forms as well. Lately, I've been making a lot of stemware pots, and that is inspired by I bartend part time, uh, and just looking at all the cocktail forms are just they're so beautiful, like coupe glasses and
Right. Yeah.
all these different glasses, and they're just really beautiful forms that I want to incorporate into my work, and so that's inspired by that. I'm trying to think of other forms that like teapots. Teapots are really fun. I use my kettle every morning making coffee, and so that's a form that I kind of identify with as like my morning routine that I want to kind of carry through. I use mugs all the time, and so in that sense, my identity and like what I use in my daily life, I make the forms of to share with people. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's like it's all about connection, like human connection.
Yeah.
It's what it should all be about.
Yeah.
Not mass consumerism.
Heard that.
Yeah. I feel like I've talked with a ton of composers on and off the podcast, mostly off the podcast, actually. But it's always kind of like we kind of put this need for permission on ourselves. Like we need permission to really pursue our identity, or even just like you're kind of describing like your personal routine showing up in your work, which is like a really interesting thing to me. I mean, do you feel like you had to have permission from someone or something to really get into that? Or was it just like one day, yeah, I'm going to do this?
I would say yes, in the frame of critiques. It's scary to kind of just put yourself out there and be like, hey, yo, this is me. Buy it. So having critiques and these conversations with other people about, hey, like, this is what I'm thinking about, this is my thought process, this is what I want to communicate, and having them give you that validation. I think that validation is that permission,
Yeah,
for me on my end. And I know that musicians have critiques as well, and just having that validation of somebody saying, hey, yeah, this is really good. I think that's the permission that everybody needs, just to have that validation of like, okay, cool, like what I'm making is cool and it does matter, and it is a beautiful thing. And I think that more people need that. And not just artists. And when I say that, I mean all mediums. I think that a lot of people get scared from getting into artwork because they feel like they don't have permission, because they're not a quote unquote artist, because they didn't go to school for it, because they're not quote unquote good at it when they do it for the first time. And I think that everybody needs to realize that you need to give yourself that permission. And, just to have fun with it, that's enough of a reason. You don't
yeah,
need to create to sell or to exhibit in galleries or try to get into museums or anything like that. I think that applies to everybody.
for sure. Yeah. And that's something I've actually been trying to reconnect with in my own music making is, you know, prior to grad school, you may or may not know this, but Morehead State does not have a music composition program or a music composition teacher. So my degree ended up being like a general music degree, which longtime listeners of the podcast will know that. So I apologize for repeating myself. But at any rate, I feel like there was this pre-grad school and post-grad school operating mode for, we'll say operating system. We'll pretend I'm a computer. Whereas, I was like making a lot of, I was writing a lot of music before grad school and having a lot of fun doing it. And, they sometimes like people were asking me to do it, and those ended up being my portfolio pieces at the end of the day. And other times I was just like, I was just in my dorm room late at night doing that instead of playing video games or watching TV or going out, which there's no place to go in Moorhead. So, that's okay.
Hey,
As you
yo,
know,
there's Sasto now. Shout out.
there is, yeah, that was not there. That was a bookstore when I was going to school. So,
No.
um, but at any rate, and then after I got to grad school, that's when I started being in those situations where it's like, sitting around the table with peers and critiquing music and I was introduced to so many new ideas at the same time as well, where it was like, oh, I can do this with music. I had no idea. And I gained a lot from that. And I lost a lot from that as well. As I think a lot of people do in academic settings, which it is what it is. I don't think it's good or bad. But, for me lately, it's kind of like, I miss sitting around late at night just making music for fun. How can I get back to that? How can I do it in a way that like is a little more polished and professional, obviously, than it was, 15 years ago when I was in college? And that's, yeah, I think you're right. Like we all can't just be on the grind all the time as artists, right? We also have to do things for ourselves sometimes and like treat our little art treats, whatever that is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love that you're thinking about that process of like reconnecting with that like original inspiration, and those moments of like it's just you and your medium and your instrument, and you do some self-reflection, and you just make, and you just let that creative process flow. I mean, flow, like the state of flow and getting lost in that. And it's such a vulnerable experience too. Like making artwork is really vulnerable
Yeah,
because you're taking this core part of yourself and you're just putting it out there for everybody to look at. And that's why I think that's where that permission comes from. I think people need that validation of like, oh, my artwork is good and I am too. Because we tie ourselves in so closely with our artwork. And I know that there's a lot of discussion of people trying to put a divide between there, like I am me and this is my work, or I am a part of my work, or I am my work. And that's a really good conversation to get into. But yeah, like I love that moment of like, okay, let's get back to the beginning. What started all of this? Let's get all of this grind, all of this capitalist hellscape bullshit that we have to deal with out of here, and let's just make like why are we doing this, and reconnecting with that.
Yeah, for sure. I will say though, it's easier to do that with pottery than it is with like a piece of music. For what it's worth, that was my experience. It was like, oh, I can like make a bunch of stuff in a sitting. That's cool. I know how easy it is to hear a mid roll just like this one and tune out completely. I do it too. Actually, I even skip through them sometimes. But if you've been enjoying this episode and you're still with me here, this is a great moment to hit follow, leave a quick rating, or just tell a friend. All of those actions really do matter, and you can find links in the show notes, or you can visit looseleaftransmissions.com to do all of those things and more. So you've already touched on this quite a bit. Your current focus is atmospheric firing and kiln building, and this is the part of the podcast where I'm going to absolutely geek out because this ended up being my favorite part of pottery. It took me a while to get there in my short tenure as a potter, but once I started doing the raku, like I took the alt firing raku class at Queen City Clay, where for those who don't know what that means, I would love for you to explain that. But basically, we were putting pots and trash cans full of hay and doing all kinds of fun stuff like that. And then I got to be friends with John Steen, who's the education director at Queen City Clay, and he's really into all this stuff and just loved like doing the wood firings with him. And those were my favorite pieces that I got from myself. So anyway, I'm not going to keep talking about this because this is your thing, but I just preface this by saying, folks, you're going to hear me like lose my mind here in a second, probably, and just be prepared. So atmospheric firing. Can you kind of begin by breaking down what it is for those who may not know, and the differences between that type of firing and then what would be like a regular firing, like in an electric kiln, for example?
Yeah. So in ceramics in general, we have to work with firing the clay, getting the clay to reach temperature for it to turn into ceramic. And we can do that in a couple of different ways. Kilns, they are defined by their fuel source. And so oftentimes the most common firing is electric. You just plug the kiln into the wall and it fires using electricity. There are gas fueled kilns and there are wood fueled kilns. So a wood kiln, in the evolution of kilns, comes before electric. It's a very like traditional way of firing. We have this big old kiln that's fueled by wood, and we get it from room temperature to 2,300 degrees over the course of anywhere between, 26 to some people go as long as 10 days firing this kiln.
Wow.
And then, so that's wood firing, fueled by wood. And then we have soda firing, which is gas, fueled by gas. And at peak temperature, we put these chemical burritos in there, or like chemical, mixtures of whatever with ingredients such as baking soda, like bought from the store. And raku is fueled by it's fueled by gas, and we take it out when it's, I think the temperature was 1800, 1900-ish degrees. And we put it into a trash can of, shredded newspaper combustibles. And throughout all of these firing processes, we're thinking of not only the clay body, not only thinking about the glaze, but we're thinking of the atmosphere in the kiln. So that's where the atmosphere term comes in from. We're thinking about the wood ash that's in the pots. How's that flying around? Where is the flame going? Because the flame, when it touches the pot, it leaves a mark. And so we're thinking of the flame. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it going across? Is there more oxygen in the kiln? Is there more fuel in the kiln? because fire needs oxygen to breathe, right? And so is it coming from the air, or is the fire going to the pots to eat that? And so we're thinking of the process and the environment in the kiln and how that changes the pots. And so that's just a whole nother layer of information that we can use to make our pots look the way that they do.
I have to say that I think that unpredictability is what made me fall in love with it. It's like, and Susanna does it too. She does wood firings, and she, unlike me, she sells her stuff at markets.
I have a pair of her earrings right here next to me.
Yeah, are they the wood fired earrings?
Yeah, the porcelain. The soda fired porcelain ones.
Soda fired. Yeah, yeah. She hasn't done that as much, I don't think. I don't know. She's gonna listen to this and correct me, probably. That's fine. But I love like talking about, and I love that I know how to talk about, and I love talking about her wood fired pieces at these markets, because someone will look and be, oh, that's so pretty, and it's like, the way I describe it to like a person on the street basically is, it's all the smoke and the wood and the ash and the flame, it does its thing on these pieces of jewelry or these pots or whatever, and it's unpredictable, but it's reliably like beautiful. It's just like the best looking stuff. Like when I put my stuff through the wood kiln for the first time and it came out, I was like, okay, now I'm doing it. Everything else I've done for the past 2 years, that doesn't matter.
Yep.
So, I mean, what draws you to atmospheric processes like this? And I guess on top of that, what have you learned from letting, the fire and the flame leave their marks on your pieces? What's like the difference maker in all that?
Oh man, that's such a. We're all just a bunch of pyros. We like playing with the fire, and so like there's that element of like, okay, cool, like I get to poke fire and make cool things happen. But also it's like this collaboration with this element that people have been trained to be afraid of. I mean, nowadays most people have electric stoves, and the only time people interact with fire is around a campfire. And it was such a huge part of our ancestry as human beings to like be around a fire. It's warmth, it's protection, it's light, and to reconnect with that element and make it a permanent part of my artwork process and a part of my pots is really, really interesting to me. And so that element of working with the fire is super appealing. The concept of leaning into a tradition and keeping it alive is really, really interesting to me. Wood-fired pots and soda-fired pots are not efficient at all. Yeah. They're not. It's not an efficient way of making pottery, but choosing to do it anyway to keep that tradition alive and to have that effect on my pots is really interesting. Community. You cannot fire these kilns on your own. I mean, you've been there on shift. Wood firing takes a team, and it's so fun. Like you get to hang out, and being around a fire, it just changes the vibe. There's just such a meaningful connection that comes from that. That's just super, super interesting to me. It's like the best campfire you've ever been to, and like you get to make really cool artwork while you're doing it. Process is really fun. The labor of it I find really, really interesting. I like manual labor. I like stacking wood. I like stacking bricks. I like loading the kiln and unloading the kiln, and it's very tiring. It's very exhausting. It's a lot of work to stay up 6 hours for a shift from midnight to 6 a.m. stoking this kiln, and you're exhausted and you're tired, but you also have to like be thinking about the kiln and like, why is it not reaching temp? Let's try this. Let's experiment with this. Let's do that. Let's do that. And it's just this like all encompassing process that you need to be present for. And this process just forces people to be present. You have to be here. You have to be listening to the fire. You have to be listening to the kiln in order to like really understand what's going on and try to get the kiln to do what you want it to do.
Yeah. So knowing that so many musicians listen to this, primarily musicians listen, I don't know if so many, I don't know how many people listen to this podcast, but knowing that most of the listeners are musicians, I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on what you just said, which is listening to the fire. I mean, what do you get from listening to a fire throughout this process?
Ooh. So while we're firing the wood kiln, you have to be listening to the crackle of the fire, right? So that gas that's coming off of the wood, um, as soon as you stoke it, that wood ignites. You hear that crackle, that pop, and as soon as it starts dying down, dying down, dying down, then you know how to stoke it. And there's like a timing that happens, and depending on what part of the firing that changes. But listening to the fire and like literally like listening to it, but also like what does the fire want to do? Is it heating up the front of the kiln faster than the back? Is it heating the back faster than the front? And so listening in the sense of like being attentive to what it's saying, because it feels like a collaboration with the fire. We can't really control it. We can try to do our best to encourage things to happen. There's a way of like, okay, if I stoke it this pattern, it'll reach this temperature this way. But sometimes it just doesn't want to do what you want it to do.
Right. Yeah, I'm guessing that there's so many elements that, I mean, like the temperature outside maybe, or the humidity in the air probably has something to do with it. I mean, we could probably spend a couple hours just talking about this, which we will later. we won't subject everyone to that, but yeah, I absolutely loved just the process. Like, I could get total garbage as results. Again, it's reliably beautiful. You just don't know what you're going to get. But
Mm.
even if the results to me were like complete garbage, I just loved, playing with fire, basically, like you
Mm.
said. I mean, I loved,
Mm.
the process of noticing and paying attention to what's happening and all the different moving parts to it. And, the fact that if you're on the team starting the fire, starting the process, it's a very different vibe from the team who's finishing it, right?
Oh yeah.
Or compared to like the vibe of the people in the middle of the night, like in the middle of the process. So just absolutely love all of it, and I will hopefully do one again sometime soon for people listening wondering. But I'm curious, like, because you've done this so frequently. I mean, are there any pieces of your own work that stand out to you that have come out of these processes that are especially memorable or surprised you in ways that like you could never have even imagined going through this process?
I mean, there's at least one pot from every firing that really, really stands out to me. But recently, I mean, everything that stands out has been in this residency just because I've been able to have so much time and focus to make. But there was this one cup that I made. It was a titanium flashing slip that I had gotten, not my own recipe, but I put it on the pot, and it was my first pot that I really could see the growth in my work. I'm trying to get looser with my clay, trying to get looser with my throwing, to show the history more and to have more atmospheric surface on my pots. And this little cup that came out, it had this beautiful like flashing, and there's titanium crystals on it, and you could see the dramatic throwing lines on it, and it had a foot that I really enjoyed, and there's a little bevel on the lip, and the inside glaze just worked. And like everything in that little pot, that little humble little cup, just kind of was like, oh, hell yeah. Like, yeah, I am like growing my work. Um, that was really, really fun. There's also a teapot that I made during my time at Penland. I was at Penland for 2 weeks for Linda Christensen's pencil pot workshop, and she was teaching us how to be more pensive with our work. And there was this one teapot that I made that had a little dinosaur on it on the top, a strainer, and it was a new clay body that I hadn't worked with before, high iron, and it just kind of looked like a little genie bottle to me. And having that little dinosaur on top was kind of
Yeah.
like a little bit of fun, and taking this form that wanted to be proper in the sense of like we're gonna sit down with our teacups and have a tea time whatever, instead of like, oh yeah, I have a beer stein that I'm gonna like throw back with.
Right.
um and taking that element of like where the situation that the pot wanted to be in, taking that away with adding this like little dinosaur on top was like, okay, like I get to control the setting that the pot wants to be in, which is really fun. And like having that juxtaposition of these different aspects of the pot. And that was just like a really interesting experiment and realization on my part of, oh, I get to play. I get to play with this medium and have cool things come out with it.
I remember seeing you post that on your Instagram, and I was like, "Oh, I like this." I like
it's gotten a lot of mixed reviews.
Mixed review. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I like it. So.
Oh, I love it.
You've touched on a few things that I'd love to dig into more, just because anytime I sit down with someone who has a different discipline than myself, it's interesting to find out like how you do measure growth and how you do measure success, which I think is something that we all probably need to think about and also, need to define in our own kind of ways. So, I mean, you talked about noticing your own artistic growth in a piece. What does that mean to you? Like, how do you measure growth as a potter or as Sinclaire?
Mm-hmm. So there is a like general, does this function? Like, is this fulfilling its function? Is the mug mugging? Is the cup cupping? Does the teapot pour? Does it dribble? So there's this kind of standard functional aspect to it, but you can play around with that function. Like maybe you want the cup to be a little bit heavier so it feels more grounded, or maybe you want a flower pot to be heavier, whatever. I'm going on a spill on that. So there's that aspect of, okay, the function is functioning. And especially when working with clay, you need to make sure that there's no cracks, that there's no pinholing or anything like that. So there's those technical aspects of clay, and seeing growth in that. I can see that literally on the pot. And then there's growth as a like conceptual ceramic artist. Like, is my concept communicating through the pot? I'm a big fan of asking somebody like, what is the pot telling you? Like, tell me one word that the pot is communicating to you. And I've been getting a lot of like warmth, which is really exciting because that's what I want my pots to communicate. And so having that success of, okay, cool, people are getting that message that I'm putting into my pots across. I'd see that as a success. And then I would also just, as Sinclaire, success in just still doing this and still making and still exploring it, experimenting and doing new things with it. So even just still making, I see as a success.
I think, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but I feel that, and I think that's probably how we all feel. Like, it's like, I'm still doing it. That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, I feel that. Another thing that you've been kind of saying throughout our conversation, which I'd love for you to maybe just define, or, we can talk about it, is you talk about the information that a piece conveys, the types of information. And I have an idea about what you mean by that, but I'm sure that, we do use the word information in music, but not maybe in the same way. But I feel like in speaking with potters over the past few years, or being in classes, or, people who do it professionally mainly, the information that a pot conveys is a big part of, maybe the intention of it or what you're thinking about as you conceptualize a pot. So can you talk a little bit about what is the information when you say that, and what role does that play?
Nice. So if I were to explain this to, like a bunch of musicians who are like, clay, cool, I don't know what that information looks like, I would tell people to look at the texture of the clay. Like, is it smooth? Is it rough? Is it bumpy? Can you see lines in it? Can you see scratches, tears? Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. So there's that information of the actual clay form, right? So is it wheel thrown? Is it hand built? Is it slabs? Is it pinched? So there's that beginning process of how the pot was made. Like, what did the maker do with the clay? those marks that are left. And sometimes, it can get messy. Did the maker like accidentally scratch the pot and like leave the mark in there? Did the pot accidentally get like dropped, or was this bumped into something? Did it get stuck? So there's that information of like, how was the clay treated? And then there's the next step. Like, what glaze did they use? Did they use flashing slip? Did they use a slip? Did they use engobe? Did they brush it on? Did they dip it on? Did they leave their finger marks on it? Did they use decals? And then there's, on top of that too, like, how is it fired? Pots from an electric kiln speak a different information than an atmospheric pot would.
Yeah.
And specifically with atmospheric pots, more information comes from the firing. Like, was it fired in a soda kiln? Was it fired in a wood kiln? Where was it loaded in the kilns? Like, that is super important in how the pot is made, and that is communicated. Was the pot stacked on top of another? Are there wad marks? Are there flame trails? Are there comet trails? Where did the fire touch the pot? That's another layer of information. And potters and atmospheric will load a kiln specifically in a way that where the fire touches, it leaves that mark, that flashing mark, and that's more information as well. And also after that, how much ash did they leave on the pot? Did they sand it down? Did they leave it rough? How did they clean up the pot? And so there's all of this different information of process. And on top of that, like, what design elements did they put on it? Did they draw on it? Did they put words on it? Did they write on it? Did they illustrate? And there's just so many different ways for the pot to communicate something. And really just looking at, okay, color, texture, the weight of it also communicates information too. Is it light? Like a teacup, it's a little bit lighter, so it kind of makes you handle the pot a little bit softer and a little bit more dainty. Whereas like a sturdy stein might be, you might feel more comfortable using that. The rim of a cup, how is that formed? That communicates as well. So and I've left out so much. Like, there's a lot of room for information for the pot to communicate to the user.
So information could be a desirable component for people. People could like want to lean into that and say, like, when you look at my, like, information could be the story that the pot tells.
Yeah.
And so people could see all of these different components or elements and say, okay, this is kind of, I have an idea of how this was made. Or so a potter could choose to not give any information away. Like, I'm thinking of like a very clean line, but even that, that kind of says some stuff, right?
Yeah. And that communicates something too. That's information of like, how much time did they spend cleaning up this pot, sanding it down, making sure it is crisp and clean.
Yeah, this whole time I'm like trying to think of like the analogy in music, and I'm sure, it's like evening time on a Monday. If I was fresher, someone might be listening to this and say, oh, I can think of some analogies, but it's hard for me to like think of a true analogy in music because for the most part, not necessarily all the time, but for the most part, I think most music is presented in this like fully complete state that does not say anything about the process of how it was made. I'm like sitting here with a pen and pencil and erasing, and not every little bit of like the story of how I made it makes its way into the final product in a piece of music necessarily. I would say there are ways to going about it where the process of making the piece might reveal itself over time in the music in some way. But even then, yeah, I don't know.
I'm not a musician. I wish I was, but I would think that with music, the information comes from the feeling and emotion that's communicated, like the high highs and the low lows, the transitions between periods, the feeling and emotion of the creator of that piece. That information is there, and maybe there's references to something. And I think that clay kind of works the same way, like however the maker was, like, were they feeling angry? Were they just like harsh with their pots, and that's communicated and that's information on the pot. So I'd say that like it does reflect how the maker is feeling at the time.
Yeah, that's true. I'll take that. So by the time I usually ask this next question, the answer has been said in some form or fashion, but I will ask you more directly. what would you describe as the primary pillars of your creative practice? So this could be, your philosophies, your style, aesthetic, anything like that that kind of forms the foundation of what you make.
Hmm. I would say one of them being returning people to the environment around them, or returning people to nature and like clay and earth, and getting away from all this mass produced bullshit that's being sold as a necessity. And when you go to a home, it's usually like Walmart bought dinner set. And like, no shame, no shame, no hate, no hate.
No, it's okay. You came to our house and saw all of our IKEA ware. You're like, what is this?
Like, no shame on that. Like,
I was
people...
like, they were $1.
that right there. Like, this is what I can afford, and like, there is no shame in that. We are all struggling. This, it's hard times here in US, but like, just returning people to like, oh, what am I consuming? What am I allowing into my home?
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard for people to be able to afford stuff like this, and I hate that barriers there of the user and the maker, but just returning people to the present and like what they're using in their life, and what meaning does it come from, and what energy is it bringing into your life. I find that using a handmade plate there's a lot more energy in that compared to some Walmart plastic plate. When I'm using that plastic plate, I'm not thinking of like, okay, I just need to eat because like I gotta eat. I'm also thinking of like, oh, I am nourishing myself on this artwork, and I'm making it a thing. I am bringing meaning into daily life activities, and also just that concept of returning to earth and nature. People, I mean, we need it. We need it for our well-being, our mental health, our physical health. And I think that nowadays people are being trained to be afraid of nature, to be afraid of going outside and like really really experiencing that. And especially in like urban areas, and moving to Cincinnati, there's parks for sure, but um, we're taught to like keep the outside outside. Yeah. Don't bring it inside. And I think that pottery is a really great way to bring that back into the home.
If you really want to stay connected to what I'm building here, the best way isn't social media, actually. It's the newsletter. That's where I share new episodes, unfiltered thoughts about the creative process, ways to support the work, and whatever's coming next. You can sign up at looseleaftransmissions.com or through the link in the show notes. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about this idea of like bringing the earth back into people's hands? I mean, what is that relationship between material maker and user? What does that mean to you exactly? I mean, you kind of touched on that, but I'm curious to dig deeper.
I think that the connection lies in ancestry. Thinking back to human evolution, when clay pots came around, that's when people started to settle down. They weren't necessarily nomadic and traveling around everywhere, and it was a sense of like, okay, like we are settling. Here is this new technology. We are using the earth as a tool to enrich our life, and capturing our culture and history and stories at the same time, and leading into that ancestral use of the earth to enrich our life in a beautiful form as like art, not necessarily just like straightforward tool, is really interesting to me. And I think that it communicates to a core part of ourselves as human beings, thinking to like basic necessities and what it means to be human. And there's just this human draw to clay. As kids, we go outside and we play in the mud and we rub it all over ourselves and we throw it at each other or whatever you do with it. There's just this appeal of like, oh, what is this? What is this material? And going back to that tactile information. People communicate in different ways, and I think that clay is a really great way to communicate through the sense of touch and having that in our hand and being able to interact with it in such a close proximity
Yeah.
is really interesting to me. Like if you have a painting, you look at it, right? And you gain information and concept through looking. Whereas with clay, you get to look, you get to touch, you get to taste it. I mean, water from a cup that's just been bisqued tastes different than a plastic cup. You know, the way that you change the rim can change the way that sake tastes, for example. And so I think that clay is communicating into more than just one sense and having, for me, a more well-rounded experience.
What this kind of makes me think of is, um, I'm sure you've experienced this as well, but having taken all these pottery classes, we wind up with so much pottery that we just give it away, right? And so we give people mugs, and there were a couple Christmases where it was just like everybody gets a mug for Christmas. I think we started doing pottery during COVID, and I think it was that first COVID Christmas we mailed out gifts to a bunch of people, and it was all pottery. So, and everybody's like, this is my favorite mug, thank you so much. And then like we go to visit, and they're like pointing at it, like, see what I got over there. And I don't particularly think that it was like any of it was like anything remarkable or special. It's just like it is part of that connection. It's like, oh, someone I know made this and I love using this now. I think it's a little bit about what you're talking about though, in that maybe people had never ever used like a handmade vessel before to eat or drink out of. And so for people listening who, I'm breaking the fourth wall a lot in this. I apologize. I never do it this much. I want this to be a crash course on pottery, though. So, and I'm going to leave that in. So, for people listening, what would you say, like, to them if like they had never used something like this, like convince them that they need to, if they haven't been convinced already?
Ooh, how to convince people to use handmade pots?
Yes.
That's because all the cool kids are doing it.
There you go.
But also, like, it's a different experience. It really is. Like, you get to feel the energy of the maker through it, and it connects you to the maker, and it connects you to process, and it connects you to paying attention to what you're doing, right? So whether you're drinking a cup of coffee, like if you have a diner mug, you're not going to be thinking about like the diner mug. You're going to be thinking about, I need to get caffeinated because I got stuff I got to do. But if you're using a handmade cup, that interaction changes. Not only are you trying to just like get and nourish yourself with whatever you're consuming, but you're also thinking about like, what am I doing? I have this mug in my hand and I'm drinking from it and I'm spending time with this pot, and what is the story that's being told on it? The plate that I'm using or the bowl that I'm using, what is the story that I'm being told? And you're thinking, you're more present with what you're doing because of this piece. And that information is just, it's really nourishing, it's really enriching, and I think that more people need to be present. There's so many people that have like anxiety and depression, and we're in this like mental health crisis here, and moments like that are nourishing for us. And pots aren't the only thing that does that. Music does it. It makes us more present. Paintings and sewing or whatever, any medium it is, makes you more present. It's just a different way of how it's communicated. And I think that people who tend to be more tactile respond really, really well to ceramics. And people who love food, like foodies, we love that tactile art form being involved in that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree, obviously. So you've mentioned a couple times, about wanting the marks and the warmth of process to stay visible in your work, and that the history of how an object was made is part of its story. We talked at length about like technically what this is, like what information is and how a pot can tell a story through, technique, texture, shape, color, lists all the elements. But I'm curious to know, like, what this is in your work from maybe a more philosophical place. So, do you think of those traces as something like memory, or is it something else entirely?
I would say memory for sure. I would say that those marks and traces are also honesty and how it was made. I would say that it's just I mean it's proof of how this thing came to be and showcasing that and celebrating that by leaving it encased in this object that can survive and will survive longer than I will, like
Mm.
looking at the pots that are in museums thousands of years old, we're solidifying this information into these objects that are gonna exist for a hot minute.
I mean, to illustrate your point too, I have to tell this story, even though it's more like Susanna's story to tell, but she prefers to stay like this concept on the podcast and not like an actual person that I talk to. Um, at any rate, we were in Japan earlier this year, and we spent a little time in Beppu, which is in Western Japan, and kind of, I mean, Japan's an island, so Beppu's on the coast, and
Mm-hmm.
we stopped into this like little shop cafe underneath the train tracks, and it's like a lot of places in Japan that's just like kind of ran by one person. Like this lady does it all. That's her shop. She'll make you coffee.
Yeah.
She'll make you a sandwich. She'll sell you stuff and so I had learned a little Japanese, and I learned how to say in Japanese that my wife makes pottery. So that when we went to shops, they knew that it's like, hey, we know what we're talking about. We know what we're looking for. And she had all this pottery in her shop, and I said it, and she, like, her eyes lit up, and she's like, I have to share like a treasure with
Mm,
you. And she had this kind of crate underneath a shelf that she pulled out, and it's full of these little bits and pieces of pottery.
mm.
And she gave us the very center part, like the foot of, and everything else was gone. It was just like the foot of what would have been maybe a plate, I think, or something. She said that she uh, would go walk along like the beach and pick up all the pieces of pottery washed ashore from the ocean. And so it's like, how old is this? Nobody knows, but it's like this ancient piece of pottery that now we just have it because this lady gave it to us.
I
and
love that.
and it was probably like floating around in the ocean for centuries, maybe. That's maybe more dramatic than it maybe reality, but that's what I'm gonna believe. We don't really know, but
Well, and there, I mean, you guys got the sense of like this thing is old, this thing is ancient, this thing has a history. There's so much mystery behind it, and I love that. Like that's the one thing that you learned, like made sure that you learned how to say in Japanese. That your wife knew how to make pottery, especially in Japan, because like their tradition in ceramics is intense and beautiful. But the sense of like grabbing, like finding this little treasure and this gift giving from her to you guys of like here is this material that we value, and I'm going to transfer this to you, giving this energy of like wherever it was from, the beach. I mean, there's this intention of focus and energy that she is giving. Like this lady, she went to the beach and she just walked and was collecting all these pots, and moments like that are typically when people refresh and they do some self-reflection and they are looking for questions and answers, or maybe they're trying to run away from something, these like human things. And she's taken this experience of collecting these pieces that she values, and she found somebody, this couple that also values it and is gift giving that to you guys, and now you guys have that, right? You guys are keeping
yeah,
it. And so this little piece of pottery, it's not necessarily like functional in the sense of like it will hold a cup of water, but it's functional in the sense of like it's carrying this energy and this meaning behind it, and that in combination of like sharing this moment of like passion, like we all care about this thing, and here's this material to symbolize and solidify that is so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
And maybe that's also why we went on to like buy a lot more pottery, actually buy it from her. So maybe it's
Nice.
a strategy, but
she's like,
yeah,
oh, I can get these guys.
love our little fragment of washed up East Asian pottery. Maybe Japanese, maybe something else. We don't know. But it definitely has that look of antiquity to it. There's a little design on it. It's great. So
well, and that goes into this idea of people being materialistic. There's materialism in like, oh, if I buy this super expensive watch or car, that means I'm more valuable, right? Like, no, that's not the materialism I'm talking about. I'm talking about the materialism of we collect things that matter to us, whether that's, different pens or, different things, whatever people collect. We're collectors. We carry things with us. And pottery has this beautiful ability to also collect energy of like what people are doing, and being able to use that in your day-to-day life is just really cool.
for sure. So here's another question that I ask everybody, and it's a little different because you're not a musician, but that's okay. What is a piece of art, whether that's a visual piece or if it is music, a song of some kind, maybe a book, a film, anything like that, that changed the way that you thought about your work? It can be more than one thing too.
My first wood-fired cup. It wasn't actually like my own possession. I was at Moorhead State, and there was this little wood-fired whiskey cup. I don't know who made it. I don't know who the signature was. There was a little chip in the foot, and it was just this humble little cup. But there was so much information on it. There was like the red of the clay, there was the ash, there was the throwing marks, and I think it was my first interaction of like, oh, this humble form actually has a lot going on it. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of history in this little guy, and it got me going. It was like, oh man, wood firing. This is really cool. This is connecting me with something older than I am, and I want to get more involved in that. It is now my cup. It is not mine. I think it was like maybe 2 years after I first saw it and interacted with it, I was finally able to like snag it for my own.
Nice. So, was this for sale, or did you was it given to you? Like,
Yeah,
how
it
did
was it was given. It
Okay.
kind of I
Yeah.
didn't steal it.
No. I was like, you had to save up money to.
No, no, it was given to me for free. I had left the university before I was able to get it, and like it was like hopping around the studio, and then I went back for a visit and was like, there it is. I want it. And so
Yeah, awesome. So since this is a music podcast, kind of because I'd love to talk to more non-musicians, but we're getting there slowly. What role has music or even sound? We were talking a little bit about like the sound of fire earlier, so it could be music and or sound. What role has that played in your life or played in your creative practice, if at all?
mm, I would say that music defines the type of flow that I get into in my making practice. Flow in the sense of like losing yourself in that, like you no longer are thinking about time. You're not thinking about anything outside. It's just you and the material, and you're lost in it. The type of music and rhythm that I listen to, I'll communicate through that, right? So if I'm listening, I can't listen to like EDM or like electronic music, because then my pots are just going to be like sporadic and they're not going to be
Yeah.
working. But if I listen to something a little bit more calming, then I myself will calm, and like my throwing will become more slow and intentional. Or if I'm listening to a podcast, then I'm thinking about learning and information and what I've learned and what information can I put into a pot. Or if I'm listening to like good old Appalachian music, then I feel homesick, and I feel like then I start thinking about home, and then I start thinking about bluegrass hills and how that can communicate into my pot and the experiences that I've had and bringing those into my work. And so it just like music, it definitely changes the way that I make. It just depends on the type of music. Like there's certain music that I can't listen to, and there's some that I definitely should.
Yeah. This whole idea of like getting into like a flow state through the music, I
Hmm.
totally feel you. And like
Hmm.
it's one of my greatest things that make me sad is that so much of the work that I do, I can't listen to music while I do it because it's so aural, whether it's like editing audio or I do occasionally will put on music while I compose, which makes me feel like a crazy person when I admit that. Like,
That's crazy.
um, like just softly in the background. And it's like it's not like the kind of music I'm making. It's like, the example I like to give. I wrote a big orchestra piece some years ago and I put on Wilco. Wilco is like my favorite band. And I was like, just listening to Wilco while writing an orchestra piece or sounds nothing like it. But, to your point, like, whatever, whether it's music or film or television or the books you read or the art that you look at or the pots you pick up, it all kind of makes its way into the work that you do. I'm sure that in some way the few years that I spent making pottery myself impacted my compositional work. I don't know if I could cogently tell you how, but how can it not?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that goes back to that topic of environment. Like what is in your environment? What colors are going on? Is it tidy? Is it clean? Do you have incense going? Um, what is your surrounding? Because we subconsciously take that in and communicate that through our work, especially when we go into the flow state. If we have like in my studio, I have images of work that I'm really inspired to and like pots that I'm really inspired by and color schemes, and just having that around for you to subconsciously absorb will show itself in your work. And so going back into the home, what music are you playing? What's the ambiance? What's the vibe what's the environment that you put in together? Because that's going to communicate through us. And so with you having your favorite band playing on the background, there's that sense of, oh, I'm comfortable. I know this song. I love this song. And you're getting this inspiration, this sense of like you, in the sense of like you see
Yeah.
yourself in your work, and you're finding yourself more. And so thinking about the environment, what are we consuming? What is in our immediate space? Because it does, we subconsciously take it in.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
just trying to better that.
Yeah. So, shifting gears a little bit, something that you said to me before we met today was that persevering as a maker, staying motivated, and self managing has been a big lesson for you lately. What have you learned about, when it comes to what it takes to keep showing up for the studio, even when it's hard? And I'm sure this is like, we can all relate to this.
Oh, I'm still learning. Like, uh, learning that nobody's gonna hold your hand and make you do it. You gotta just force yourself to do it. You gotta force yourself to get into the studio and put yourself in that environment to allow that flow to invite itself for you to make. It's hard to balance like just being an adult and balance adult things and paying bills and relationship and family issues or celebrations and hanging out with friends and just all of this life stuff, balancing that with like you are an entrepreneur in the sense of like it's only you. You gotta make the work, you gotta market, you gotta communicate, you gotta be the customer service, you gotta be the HR, you gotta do all these things, and learning what that means and how much effort and what that takes is what I'm learning and continuing to learn how to do. And how important it is to have a community to lean on to help and to have that validation of, okay, cool, like they've done this before, I can do it this way too. I'm learning that it takes a lot. It takes a lot of self determination to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could do it any other way myself. And what you're describing is, I think, at least for us composers, is a relatively recent phenomenon where, I would say most composers I know are self-published. They do all their stuff themselves. It's all available through their websites, but for the longest time you had to have like a publisher, right? And so even now I talk to people my age who go through grad school, and they aren't taught to do these things. It's not, I don't think it's like really anyone's fault. It's just like not a part of a lot of curriculums yet.
That's how it
Because
was for me too. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to ask, like, is there a history of what you're describing, like this kind of entrepreneurial approach to proliferating your work, I guess? Is there a history of that in pottery, or is that also like relatively recent?
Oh, yeah. I think in general, just any artist, any creative maker has to be an entrepreneur because nobody else is gonna, this country does not. There's not a lot of assistance for us to be makers, but we're all just rebellious and we use spite to fuel our fire to keep going. Luckily, in undergrad, I did take a couple of classes in art entrepreneurship, and so I was able to have that mentorship from Melissa Youngblood to like be able to coach myself in how to make a living off of this and how to make this financially achievable, whatever that means. But yeah, I think that a lot of creative curriculums don't teach people how to stay in this and make it consistent. They teach like process and techniques and skills, and those are important. But I feel like a lot of people in our fields, in the creative fields, are kind of left in the dust a little bit because you graduate and it's like, oh, what I how do I make this last? And I think that's where community is really important. We got to lean on each other and get inspiration and connect with people. So that way we can keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask you about that, now that we've touched on community, because something that I've noticed is that you are really into like trading with other artists.
Yeah.
I think you've traded with us or with Susanna in some way. That's how we ended up with one of your beautiful teapots that we're afraid to use. So,
Nah, you better use
I
that.
know,
Use
you want us
that.
to use it, but it's so beautiful. So, at any rate, we'll use it one day soon. But I even saw like I think you traded some pottery for tattoos recently,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah, I
yeah,
did.
yeah, I'd love to hear more about this, because that feels like to me, being in touch and in community with people who do other art disciplines has always been such an important thing to me for my creativity, but also just for like just existing, being a human. So I mean, like, what is the importance of that to you? Like, why trades? That's interesting to me.
Well, first off, you ain't gonna get rich in this field, and I like things. I make
Yeah,
things, but it's more than that. It's more than that. It's these objects that we're trading. There's now even more memory and even more meaning in between that because it's this agreement between two people to share like equal valued things, like regardless of what that means, whether that's equal value of teapot to another ceramic form or vessel or whatever, or whether that's a teapot to a tattoo. It's trading and creating interactions with people, and I just think that's super super fun. And in a little way, it's my way of saying like fuck you capitalism.
yeah,
Like I don't need money to bring these objects of meaning into my life. I can interact with people one on one and trade goods that way, kind of like returning to the barter system. It's there's more value than just money, and what we make is value. What our skills are, our trades are value. And I would trade, for somebody to come and like fix my car. Anybody that's listening, like, there's just more value than money, and I really, really enjoy trades because it speaks to that. And I'd hate for people to be unable to have access to my pots because they can't financially afford it. And I think that people are so intertwined with money equates to my value. If I can't afford this, and like I can't have that value, but that's not the case. Like everybody has something that they do, something that's a part of them, whether that's like sewing or cooking or whatever you do, there's value in that. And like that is something that is tradable. I don't know. Like that just trying to communicate to people that like everybody has their thing and everybody has a value to them.
Yeah, I think that this whole like idea of almost like community exchange.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Again, like I don't necessarily feel like I create like tactile objects, and so it's hard for me to be like, hey, I'll trade you a music for a tattoo. I'd love to do that, but
That'd be sick.
I don't know how that would manifest.
Like you're trading your time.
That's true.
You're trading your attention and your intention of like, okay, you want this thing, I will spend my time because time is money. Time is money. I will spend this value of mine for you, and having that collaboration and interaction with somebody is just super dope and super cool, and we need more of that.
Not to single anyone out, but do you have a favorite trade that you've done ever?
Actually, oh no, you can't ask me that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
There's so many. What one of my favorite trades is this tattoo that I got from Sam Neill. Her and I went to school with each other, and shout out to Sam. She's an amazing tattoo artist, and the growth that she has. I'm sleeping out with her, and the most recent tattoo I got of her from her is a hand and flower, and it was just such a beautiful example of like her growing her practice, me growing my practice, and us trading each other and like having each other in that journey is really, really cool. And also just like the tattoo is really, really beautiful. Like I just love it. I love it. So yeah, I would say that that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's people can't see you. I can see you though right now. It is beautiful, and you've been pointing at it for like the duration of talking about it, as you should. So
it's also one of my favorites because it was my first trade outside of just a ceramic medium. It was like, oh, like I get to trade for other things. Like I love tattoos. I just want to be covered in them. And to have my craft be valued for that is really cool.
Well, so now that you mention it, I can imagine that trading among ceramics is probably like a pretty regular thing.
Oh yeah, everybody does it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So getting into my final set of questions, these are questions that I ask everybody to close out all the conversations. Starting with, what do you think you would be doing artistically or otherwise if it wasn't ceramics?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, I guess I could like do my charcoal drawings and paintings and stuff, but if it's not clay, I don't want it.
Well, and I'm going to ask you the question in a different way then. When you were growing up, what did you want to be like when you were a grown up?
Oh, I wanted to be an artist.
Always an artist.
Yeah. I remember my senior year, I was talking with the guidance counselor, and they were asking what do you want to do? What are your skills? And I took a career test, and I got back window washer. And I told my I told my guidance counselor that I wanted to be an artist, and they're like, well, there's nursing. It's like, no, like this is what I want. I am going to pursue a passion. I know I'm not going to make, it's not going to be at the same career path, but it's what I want.
Yeah. No, I get it. That was me with music is, by the time I was in high school, I was like, this is what I'm doing. Like, and I've ended up doing a little bit different stuff, but everything touches music in some way. So, what are you trying to get better at in your practice right now?
Everything. I want to be more efficient in my making. I want my pots to have more history and mark making on them. I want my intentions to be communicated more, like that warmth, that storytelling. I want my pots to be storytellers. I want to showcase that storytelling more. I want to be better at talking about my pots. I want to be better at talking about the whys. I want to be better at teaching. I want to be better at involving and inspiring more people to make. I want to be better at the history of it, the technical knowledge of it, the material knowledge. I just in every aspect.
I feel like that never goes away though. Like it's always kind of like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like, what do we want to be better at? I mean, yeah, I feel you. This one could be interesting depending on who you make the audience. So it could be for other potters, it could be for other artists, it could be for anybody. But is there a tool that you use in your practice that you think everyone should know about and that everyone else could benefit from? It could be a physical object, it could be, software, a process, anything like that.
I would say patience. I see that as a tool. Working with clay or just like learning any new medium or art form is frustrating. It could be so frustrating. Like, I didn't get it right the first time. I guess I'm bad at it. I'm not going to do it anymore. And that's not how it is. Like, any creative practice, whether that's music, dance, visual arts, literary arts, it's a practice. And you have to keep going and getting back to it over and over and over and over and over again, and having the patience with yourself to be like, yo, I'm still learning. This is progress. And also just learning when to like walk away. Like, all right, I'm too frustrated. I gotta go.
Yeah.
But patience for sure.
Yeah. I will admit here publicly that I did not have enough patience to stick with pottery. That's why I got really busy in other aspects of my life that forced me into retirement. But I was really frustrated. I'm a perfectionist, so it was hard. Like, I got to a point where it's like, okay, I could see what I wanted to make and could almost make it, and that's a really frustrating. That's like the gap.
You'll get back into it.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that to negate everything you just said. Like, people should stick with it. If you want to do it, go do it. If you want to make music, make music. If you want to do pottery, go make pottery. And if you need help, call one of us.
Yep.
And we'll help you.
Yep. And one day you'll look back and oh, I grew.
Yeah, totally. My final question, and maybe you've already answered it in some way throughout this conversation, but either way, what is something that you've never had a chance to say about your art that you've always wanted to share with people?
That I want everybody to get involved in it. There's no gatekeeping. There's no specific person that's worthy of using it. I want my work to inspire people to try it for themselves. And I'm a really big fan of trying to use I try to use my artwork as a talking point for other people to get involved, because the more people that get involved, the more understanding that comes into the work. And I think it's my work, for me at least, it speaks larger than just making a thing. It's a life process. It's a lifestyle. It's a like I am constantly thinking about the drying time of my pots. I'm thinking about making cycles. I'm thinking, okay, Monday, Tuesday I make, they dry, then I trim, then I fire. I have these weeks to fire until I need to make and fire. Then I need to. It's a lifestyle. It's not just a hobby. It's a intentional. I am dedicating my life to this craft, and I understand that it is not the most efficient, and I don't need to, but I do need to, in the sense of it's enriching my soul and hopefully other souls. And so I just, the sense of lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I feel you, and a beautiful punctuation mark to this conversation. Sinclaire, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great getting to know you better. I mean, we've hung out plenty, but this was like a deep dive. I loved it. And thanks for spreading the good news about pottery to everyone listening. I think people are gonna, having gotten this far, they would have really enjoyed it. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Huge thanks to Sinclaire for such a generous, tactile, even, and seriously inspiring conversation. And I admit it was really nice to revisit a bit of my former pottery hobby in this discussion. I definitely encourage you to check out her work. She is online at sinclairemarie.com, and I will have a link to her website in the show notes as well. I'm Tyler Kline. Thanks for listening to another edition of Music Maker. Music Maker is a production of Loose Leaf Transmissions made for all ears. You can find more episodes and support the work at looseleaftransmissions.com, and if you want a little extra Loose Leaf Transmissions straight to your inbox, be sure to sign up for the newsletter. It's literally the best way to keep up with not just new episodes, but new projects as well. Thanks again for listening. Do take care, and I will catch you back here next time.